The Girl at the Mogador. The story of a haunting obsession. Old theatres always held a deep attraction for me, with the glamour of their red velvet curtains and gilt decoration. Entering those darkened doors would transport me to a palace of pleasure that equalled the spectacle of the Roman amphitheatres. In those hallowed places, the audience became as much a part of the performance as the cast themselves. When the sea of riveted faces erupted with laughter or was brought to tears, the performance climbed to new heights, buoyed by the spectators' emotions. And for someone of a solitary nature, with a strong aversion to the press of the crowd, the old style of theatre made it possible to experience the theatre-goers' reactions from a safe place. Dressed in my finest suit, I could sit in the darkest recesses of my private box and ride the wave of emotion from afar, unseen. So great was my love of these secret moments that it developed into a sort of addiction. I would see the same play again and again, watching the audience as much as I watched the stage. Only when my favourite theatre closed and I was forced to seek an alternative did I stumble upon the Mogador. From the first visit it delighted me. Its smaller size gave me a greater sense of intimacy with the other watchers on those red velour seats. And the theatre buffs here were not faceless masses. As I studied the front rows by the light cast from the stage, I recognised certain people that visited each and every show. And, while I perused their ranks night after night, one face stood out. Like me, this young woman came to every performance. At first, I was mesmerised by her perfectly curled chestnut hair and artfully applied lipstick, which gave her the allure of a 1940s film star. Soon, I understood that it was not her looks which attracted me, but the range of emotions flitting across her features. For even as she laughed, a trace of sadness lingered behind her smile. When the performance finished, she always left alone. Each time I stayed in my seat to watch her depart, convinced she was my soulmate. For weeks I daydreamed of accidentally bumping into her in the lobby. After a number of these contrived meetings, we would eventually recognise each other and smile politely. One evening I might be brave enough to remark on the play, a subject of certain interest to us both. So frequently did these scenarios play out in my head that I began to spend time in the lobby. In truth, I suffered for my love. To stand amongst the milling crowds in such a place was a special kind of torture. And yet there I was, standing in the corner next to the small bar where drinks were served at the interval, trying my hardest to look like someone who belonged, someone at ease. But not once did I glimpse her perfectly formed features in that river of faces. To have any hope of meeting her, I needed a change of tactics. It hadn't escaped my notice that, like me, she was a creature of habit, always taking the same seat and always leaving by the same exit. I convinced myself that it should be easy to intercept her on that route. I would leave the performance 5 minutes early to be in position as she came through the door. When the door opened and the crowds burst through, I stopped breathing, waiting for the sight of her chestnut hair. And there she was, walking towards me. My gaze sought hers, but her hazel eyes didn't swivel in my direction. Instead, they remained fixed upon the maroon carpet at her feet. I wanted to say something, but couldn't find my voice. As usual, it had deserted me, and then the moment had passed, and she was gone. Each time I tried to catch her attention in this way, the result was the same. Not once did she raise her eyes. How was I to develop a relationship when she wouldn't let me progress from the first stage? Later, I sought reasons for why she never looked at me. There were too many people around, I told myself. Or she was in a rush. Logic told me that if I followed her into a less populated space, then I might have better luck. The new plan refilled my dwindling cup of enthusiasm. Surely this had to work. Strangely, though, my red-lipped beauty didn't choose a predictable path out into the streets beyond the Mogador. Instead, she took an internal door, one that led into the hidden realms of the theatre. When I tried to follow, I found my route barred by a locked door, as though she had locked it behind her to block my pursuit. At once, outrage bubbled within me. Was she toying with me, deliberately eluding my advances, without giving our future the slightest chance? The next time I saw her seated in her usual place, 3 rows from the front, I decided to take a more drastic course of action. If I bought the seat beside her, she would have no escape. And yet, when I approached the ticket booth, my frustration pushed me to take one step further. Like a jilted lover, I wanted to disturb her, nudge her off course. The idea came to me with a sense of perverse satisfaction. If she didn't want me, then she couldn't have her favourite seat. I would steal it from her. I even fantasized that she might buy the seat next to me and be forced to ask whether I wouldn't mind changing. The look on my face must have been smug as I stood before the ticket office. I had investigated the seat number after the previous performance and knew exactly which one to buy. I'd like to reserve seat 3F for the whole week. An odd look came over the ticket seller's face. It betrayed more than discomfort. It was the look a man might have if he had to admit to a guest that his house harboured rats. That one's not available, sir. My plan was falling into tatters, something that added to my ever-increasing frustration. Not available, I spluttered. But the seat is there. Of course it's available. He pasted a weak smile on his face, determinedly trying to carry out his duties with diplomacy. Sir, we haven't sold that seat to anyone in 20 years. It's a tradition at the Mogador to leave it empty. I had a sudden urge to take hold of his red tie with the Mogador M emblazoned upon it and hoist him up into the air, and I would have done if a glass screen hadn't stood between us. But I've seen someone sitting there, I insisted. Every show night. By then, another member of staff had sidled up, an older man that I'd often seen tending the door. We stopped selling that one because it made people too uncomfortable, he said in a matter-of-fact way. Between you and me, I wouldn't say this to just anyone, sir, but I know you're one of our best customers. That seat does peculiar things to people. Peculiar? Makes them feel cold, sad. His eyes slid away while his mouth struggled to form the words. Suicidal, even. He shifted on his feet, as if he didn't want to say anything more. I waited, determined not to let him off the hook. He sighed and shook his head, a sign that he would continue. Story goes that a young woman lost her husband to the war. Coming to the theatre had been their special thing. So, the night after she received the news, she came here and watched the performance. And then, instead of leaving the theatre, she went down into the basement and hung herself. She'd been sitting in that seat. So we're happy to sell you any seat, sir, except that one. My world shattered into a million pieces. If I believed the doorman, then I had been pursuing a ghost. I'd constructed an obsession around the residual traces of a disturbed spirit. Suddenly my life seemed so futile, so pointless. I, too, was a residual trace, I told myself, living at the edges of life. In a flurry of determination, I reserved another seat, 4 rows back from the space occupied by the red-lipped ghost. No longer would I hide. I'd sit amongst the living. Curiously, once I'd left my private box, I never saw her again. And gradually, I became one of the regulars. No longer a faceless voyeur in the galleries above, I smiled at other Mogador fans, and they smiled back. The theatre, I finally understood, was meant to be experienced as a crowd. I met my future wife at the Mogador. She didn't have red lipstick or perfectly curled hair, but she had a love of the theatre, and she had a love of life. This was a story inspired by all those tales of haunted theatres and cinemas in the UK.